Good evening to all our viewers, our guests, and a very warm welcome to our panelists here up front. Thank you very much for making the time to join us here on this. I would like to hand over right now to Mr. Leslie Mpunzi to take us through the welcome of this event.
Thank you so much, Prof. Good evening to all our guests, viewers, panelists, and the broader UJ community. My name is Leslie Mpunzi, and I am the Convocation President and a UJ member of Council. Welcome to the Great University of Johannesburg's virtual conversation series focused on our illustrious alumni. It gives me great pleasure as a former student and Convocation President of this distinguished university to be part of this program. Our proposed topic for this conversation is Cultivating Tomorrow and Navigating the Future Together. With the new academic year in full swing, this event with illustrious alumni from our university will demonstrate the unity and shared purpose of the university community. This theme will explore the unknown yet embracing change. The panel discussion focuses on the opportunities and challenges that the future holds and encourages our alumni and current cohort of students to be proactive in their educational pursuits. I would like to welcome all attendees and advise on the ground rules for this meeting. You are kindly advised to be respectful when contributing to the conversation or question and answer session. Please ensure that you also utilize the chat box section to contribute to the discussion. Colleagues, please allow me to run through the program. We have had our opening and welcome from myself. We will also have a brief presentation on the role of convocation. We will have an introduction of the panelists by the facilitator, which is Prof. Musawenkosi. We will also have a 30-minute discussion with our illustrious alumni, and we will have a 15-minute Q&A session, and we will close with a vote of thanks from Mr. Victor Khangale. Please allow me to introduce our facilitator for this conversation series. Prof. Musawenkosi Saurombe is a young academic who became a Doctor of Philosophy in Industrial Psychology in 2017, breaking an astounding academic record of becoming the youngest female PhD graduate in Africa at the age of 23. Prof. Musa worked as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Northwest University Mafikeng from 2017 and then got appointed as a senior lecturer at the University of the Free State, Bloemfontein in 2019. She later got appointed also as a senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in 2021 and was promoted to associate professor at UJ in 2022. Prof. Musa has lectured courses in human resource management and industrial psychology and supervises postgraduate research. She is a published researcher both locally and internationally, and is also known for the work she does as a civic innovator, particularly concerning women and the youth. Prof. Musa has over 5 years experience in HR consulting in the public and private sector. In 2017, Prof. Musa received the Best Doctoral Student in SA Award for 2016 from the South African Board for People's Practices and the Emerging Psychologist of the Year Award from the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology of South Africa. She was featured in the 2018 list of top 100 most influential young Africans by the Africa Youth Awards and was subsequently endowed by the Institute of People Management with the CEO's Special Award for being the 2018 Young Leader of the Year through her various distinguishable contributions in her respective fields. She was also acknowledged by the SADC Top 100, the Young Independents in 2018, and by the Mail and Guardian as one of the 200 Young South Africans in 2019. She also received an honorary award from the Golden Key International Honor Society, both in 2019 and in 2020, for her continuous contributions in the education sector and society at large. More recently, she was recognized as a finalist in 2 categories at the 10th Gender Mainstreaming Awards by Accenture in 2022, namely the Positive Role Model in Gauteng category and the General Services Sector category. She was also a finalist in the Education category of the Women of Stature Awards in 2023 and further received the Young Alumnus Award at the Northwest University Alumni Awards in 2023. Before I conclude, I want to remind you about the importance of giving back to the University of Johannesburg. UJ has a proud tradition of excellence in teaching, research, and community engagement. It is this tradition that has allowed us to thrive and produce generations of successful alumni. As you have benefited from your UJ education, it is now our collective responsibility to ensure that the opportunities we enjoyed are available to the generations that follow. I encourage you to consider making donations to the UJ Alumni Annual Fund. Your contributions will support scholarships, research initiatives, and various projects that will make a lasting impact on the UJ community. This is an investment not only in the university, but in the future of countless students who will follow in your footsteps. Together, we can ensure that the University of Johannesburg continues to be a beacon of excellence and that our alumni community remains a vibrant and supportive network. Please allow me to hand over the session to Prof. Musawenkosi, who is going to be our facilitator. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mpunzi, for that introduction and the warm welcome to our guests and panelists. I would also like to now introduce our panelists. And we have a think tank up here this evening. And it is such an honor to introduce each of you. I would just like to read through each of their bios so that our audience can be aware of the caliber of panelists that we have speaking this evening. I will start with Mr. Sizi Botsime. Sizi Botsime holds a BA in psychology, a PGCE, history, geography, and life orientation, and a remedial education advanced diploma from Nelson Mandela University, Rhodes University, and the University of Johannesburg, respectively. Sizi Botsime also completed his PG Dip in teaching, learning, care, and support at the University of South Africa. The field of special education that he is passionate about is working with children on the autism spectrum, as well as children with intellectual disabilities. His contributions to education have been recognized with 2 global teaching awards in Delhi and India in 2018 and 2019. In 2020, Sizi Botsime was named one of the top 200 most influential people in South Africa by the Mail and Guardian for his work and advocacy in education. Moreover, he is an education activist and a supporter of inclusive education. His advocacy is aligned with the White Paper 6 of 2001 and SIAS 2014 policies which advocate inclusion in education. So our panelist, Mr. Botsime, will be talking around issues of developing and sharing best practices to ensure quality education. And I believe he is the befitting panelist to speak about this, considering his illustrious contributions within the education field. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Zanoxolo Mciteka. Zanoxolo Mciteka is a UJ qualified community development practitioner, graduating at the top of his class with a Dean's Honors for Top Achievement. He has a 3-year Bachelor of Law, LLB, background from Wits University. Zanoxolo Mciteka has a great command of the law legislations that govern public policy and governance. He has also attended the National School of Governance, where he acquired a CERT certificate, I believe, in writing for government, CRT, and knowing the Constitution as well. Mr. Zanoxolo Mciteka has over 4 years experience working as a community development practitioner at the Department of Social Development, guided by the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework in instituting change in marginalized communities. He also works as a freelancer for an international organization called Columba Leadership Trust, where he works as a youth development officer. In 2022, he was recognized by the Mail and Guardian team as one of the top 200 young South Africans that are helping create sustainable change and safeguard democracy in the civil society category. In his free time, he dabbles in the music industry as an entertainer. I'm tempted to request that perhaps he could entertain us this evening, but since no provision was made for that, we will let you off this one time. Over 16 news outlets have written about him as he appeared on various TV shows under his stage name, Zanoxolo King. I'm sure you can see when I speak about the caliber of the panelists that we have, and a recurring theme as well is that many of our panelists have been recognized by the Mail and Guardian. So I think that's something amazing as well. And of course, I would like to introduce as well Prof. Duncan Coulter. Prof. Duncan Anthony Coulter has been at the University of Johannesburg by way of its precursor institution, the Rand Afrikaans University, since 2001. After a brief digression into the computerized psychometric assessment industry in the United Kingdom in 2005, he returned to the now University of Johannesburg as a permanent academic staff member in 2007. His research interests have focused on the intersection of abstractions of biological processes and artificial intelligence in the context of multi-agent systems. In 2022, he became the head of department for the Academy of Computer Science and Software Engineering within the Faculty of Science, but still greatly prefers both teaching and research to the burden of leadership. He is actively trying to trick some of his colleagues into getting promoted into his role. Sounds very interesting. And it's really great to actually have someone on the panel as well who can talk to us about AI, because I'm sure we have heard, a lot of conspiracy theories behind how very soon all of us will be replaced by robots and so forth. So it's very important that we get firsthand information from someone who's very knowledgeable, and you can tell from his introduction that he has a wealth of experience and he's able to allay our apprehensions concerning the possibilities of being replaced. And I'm sure one thing he will be talking about this evening is how it's important for us to keep up with the technologies, because as long as we can harness them, then there's no way they could replace us. And so that will be the theme. The theme he will be focusing on is the role of software developers in the age of generative AI. I realized I hadn't spoken about the theme that Mr. Zanoxolo will be covering, and his theme will be facilitating sustainable development in a debilitating society. And so I'm sure you can all tell that these are very critical aspects of the topic that we are discussing this evening on Cultivating Tomorrow, navigating the future together. A very uncertain future at that, all of us can agree. But it's important that we delve into the issues concerning our future, and I'm very excited to hear what our panelists have to say this evening. And so I will hand over to our first panelist, Mr. Sizi Botsime.
Thank you very much, Dr. Musawenkosi. And I'd also like to thank the University of Johannesburg for giving me this opportunity. As said, my name is Sizi Botsime. I am an educationist, education activist, training and development specialist. And the focal point of my talk this evening will be on developing and sharing best practices to achieve inclusive education. So just to give a bit of background, I started teaching. I've been teaching for 13 years, and my journey started in 2011 when I was a student teacher. And I remember vividly when I went to the classroom the very first day. In 2010, I got frustrated. I came across this one particular student who could not read and write, who exhibited traits of dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. And I was frustrated. I asked myself, why is it the case that this child is in grade 7, but they can't read and write? And I learned afterwards it was the system. And that is the moment where the activist in me was born. And the following year, I took up a role as a homeroom teacher, and I still, I still experience the same thing, children who could not read and write. And that made me more frustrated, with the system. And in 2013, University of Johannesburg, they introduced an advanced diploma in remedial education. And when I read the overview, of the course, I was like, this is what I need, because I really wanted to help these children, but I could not. I felt that I needed to be capacitated. And I came for that course, and following that course, I felt that I was capacitated and I was able to help those children. And as after 2 years, after I've completed the course, I felt the urge that, I need to do more. I really need to do more. And I felt I was not getting an opportunity to develop myself. And I decided to transcend the borders of South Africa, with the hope that I will develop myself personally and professionally. And that's when I got my international job opportunities. I taught in Kingdom of Bahrain. I taught in Arab Republic of Egypt, and I taught in Ghana. So primarily why I went there, like I said, it was to develop myself personally and professionally. And I acquired transferable skills. So I told myself that after a certain year, when I feel that I'm capacitated, I'm going to come back to, my country, South Africa, to come and, make a change in the education system. And I was very, very fortunate that, I came across like-minded people when I was traveling, people who shared the same sentiments, people who were frustrated. And that's when I met, my colleagues in Ghana, and my network in other countries, in Kenya, in Botswana, in Lesotho. And we came together and we coined what we called international teacher training, which is all about bringing teachers together, particularly African teachers, to share best practices. And this was underpinned by the theory of John Mahan, who said that teachers, they are the only things that teachers have is each other, and without collaboration, their growth is limited to their perspective. And being a Pan-Africanist, we're also inspired by what Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said about African problems and African issues. He said that only Africans can solve the African issues. So now with the international teacher training, we're bringing teachers together in one space so that they can share best practices, with the hope that that will attain inclusive education. We want the same education that the child gets in your top private schools. It must be the same education that the child in the deep rural areas they are getting. With this training in particular, we are very intentional, working with the marginalized communities. We've had this running this is going to be our third year. And we have our trainings in the Eastern Free State in a place called Kwakwa. And also in a place called, we have in two countries, in Morija. Morija is a very small town in Lesotho. So we've been working with, our local Department of Education. Like Dr. Musawenkosi said, that my activism is aligned with White Paper 6 and the CS document. So the White Paper 6 of 2001, it speaks about transforming the education system. It believes that every child, every individual has the ability to learn. And the education system, the education and training, institutions, they need to transform themselves so that, everyone has that opportunity to develop to their maximum potential. In addition, the CS policy, which speaks about early identification and early intervention, that has to do with the children in the system, that are experiencing barriers to learning. So the policy was enacted to address and redress those issues. So as an activist, as a teacher and activist, I believe that the role of a teacher, it goes beyond the four walls of the classroom. And we should not limit what we are doing into the classroom. And yes, in conclusion, my philosophy is that success is using the skills and knowledge acquired to transform the lives of the people in our community. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. That is, I believe, a very profound background on the theme that you are discussing. And obviously, it's things that I would like our audience to ponder on, so that, and I hope the questions are rolling in, by the way, because we're soon going to have our Q&A once our panelists are done with their presentation. So just keep the questions rolling and just ponder on what our first panelist has spoken about. I will hand over at this stage to the second panelist.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Zanoxolo Mciteka, and I'll be speaking about facilitating sustainable development in a debilitating society. So just to draw a picture of the line of work that I'm in. So working as a community development professional, it means that I am in the lower end, or rather the ground end of the implementation of government policies. So in communities, or rather what the government decides to implement, I'm one of the people that are at the ground, monitoring whether these speak to the people and whether people's needs are being met. So you might also say that the issues that we know that are faced with South Africa as a community development practitioner, I get to see them firsthand. Your unemployment, your racial divide, your economic divide, you know, and it's no longer now a tagline for me. It's something that I see on a daily, and it calls for us as society to look for solutions that really speak to the issues of people at the ground, right? So there's so much that I can say with regard to this, but for the purposes of what we're here to discuss, my main focus will be how then do we cultivate the future and in collaborative efforts to ensure that there is economic solvency in our communities. For starters, and this is literally my favorite thing, it's something that I always preach wherever I go. It is to imagine a reconciliation and collaborative approach to community development. And what I mean by this is that what the community needs and what the community wants, there should be a meeting of minds with what the policymakers are actually deciding on implementing on these communities, right? And someone might argue that since we are a democracy, this should go without saying, right? But the truth is, ideally, that's what should be happening. But in practice, you find that leaders or rather legislators implement policies based on what they think is best for the communities. And this is not only on municipal level only, but it also translates at national level also. You find that there is a promulgation of policies that do not really translate or rather speak to the issues that South Africans are really faced with, or rather that don't speak to the context of what South Africans are faced with, right? And one might also say that there is always a top-down approach to community development, which means that it's always the people at the top that are deciding what is best for the people at the bottom. For instance, I'll make an example. I work with really underserved and marginalized communities. It's okay that we're moving into an industrialization of stuff, right? But it calls for us to really consider whether the implementation of industrialization policies in marginalized communities really speaks to what the community needs at that specific level, right? I am very pro and very in support of promulgation of policies that are for the fourth industrial revolution, but also I'm very pressed about people at the ground. Marginalized people, what are the policies that speak to them, that speak to their issues, right? And also, if you're going to blanket approach policy, right, consider whether that specific community has the necessary infrastructure for the implementation of that policy, right? I'll keep referring to my notes so that I do not lose my track of thought, right? Number two, I think I did mention this. I think there should be contextualization of policy, right? So I think also in my line of work, in my experience, I've noticed that we have so much data. We collect so much data in these communities, and this data is enough to be able to form generative policies that are for the future for these communities. I really think that the biggest issues that we're faced with, your unemployment, your racial divide, if we are to really fix it, is to go to the ground, to where people are really affected by these issues, and try to find out from these people, what do you think would work for you now? Right. So what I'm basically saying is that I am vying for an approach to community development where we are not using a blanket approach, but rather we're focusing on these specific communities. And I'm not asking, or rather calling for something that is out of the ordinary. It's something that we have infrastructure to do. There's so many levels of government. There's so many initiatives. There's so many entities that are in place that would be able to track down each community, each entity, and make data-specific changes, right? And my third point is to foster active participation of young people. Now, if you would notice in the past, every movement and every revolution that has come about, young people have always been at the center of that revolution, you know. And I'm worried about the young people of today. I feel like there's a lot of political apathy, situational apathy. You know, they feel like they do not have access to the government, or rather they do not have access to the people that can make change. But the truth is, and constitutionally speaking, we are the government as young people. We are the government as community members, right? So if there are people that are about to change or are meant to change our situations, it's us. And people that should be consulted about what needs to be done in our daily lives, it's us. And this is premised in the Constitution, right? And to just close off, I did note down participation channels that civil society and young people can participate in. Number one would be obviously voting in the national and provincial elections, and also participating in integrated community development plans at municipal level. So these IDP plans happen every 5 years. So it's a review of whether the policies that have been implemented are working for the communities that they are meant for. So young people, or rather the communities, should be at those municipal IDP meetings. And also, there should also be a call for a removal of barriers, right? So as much as there's an openness to public participation models, people feel like they do not have access, or rather they are closed off from the processes, because maybe the decision making, or rather the public participation, is happening away from where the communities are, which is where I think we should ponder on innovative models of trying to get people at the ground to be heard. Because I think if community development is meant to make a change, the people that the change is meant for should be heard, right? I think that sums up most of my engagement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Zanoxolo, for those insights that you have shared. And obviously, fundamentally, when we think about the Sustainable Development Goals and how obviously this is an agenda that is pressing right now, and especially for the University of Johannesburg, that is the trajectory that we're currently steering in, focusing on the SDGs. And I just want to acknowledge that intersect between our first two panelists. Obviously, the first panelist having addressed the fourth Sustainable Development Goal of quality education. And it's very important that we continue to make those strides. And obviously, as you know, being from the global South, we unfortunately often find ourselves at the lower or shorter end of the stick. And so it's important that we also envision the type of strategy that will specifically work for our continent, for developing countries, that will ensure that while we contribute towards the global challenges that are going on, but we do it in a very focused way, so that we also solve a lot of the challenges that we have internally, before we can necessarily then focus on other challenges which may be at a higher level than what we're facing right now. So thank you very much to our first two panelists. I'll hand over to our third panelist. We're very excited to hear about the technology and all of that AI. Hopefully you can give us coding classes after this session.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. To a certain degree, there is some code in my slides already. I just have a feeling that my slides stopped sharing, so I'm just going to reshare if that's necessary. Let's just see. Yeah, and feel like this is working now. Right, so thank you very much. So I'm here to speak about the role of software developers in the age of generative AI. Being a academic and lecturer at heart, I of course prepared slides. So here we go. So firstly, we live in a pivotal point in history. All of us here have lived through a couple already. Certainly the rise of mobile telephony and smartphones, and then the large-scale adoption of the internet before it have changed society in meaningful ways. And now we are living in the era of generative AI and maybe soon proper artificial general intelligence. We're not quite sure, we'll see. But nonetheless, these changes are very broad. They affect a wide variety of disciplines simultaneously as they move along. And it's been referred to as a rising tide by Hans Moravec, a computer scientist, and then popularized by Max Tegmark in his book Life 3.0. But basically, it depicts a landscape of different human endeavors, which are at different heights based on how difficult they are for computers to perform at the same level as human beings. And the idea is that AI is this rising tide, the rising ocean, unfortunately too similar to the climate change we live through right now, but that different disciplines will fall under the rising tide as time goes by. This landscape already, I think it dates from the period when his book came out, which was late 2010s, but already I think that we would change some of the heights of these mountains. For example, art and book writing, the generative techniques that have come out since that book are possible, but not great. Certainly human beings can tell very easily at the moment what's been generated and what hasn't, but that's not necessarily going to be true forever. But the idea is that all disciplines may, if artificial general intelligence is indeed to be achieved, fall under the rising tide. The last and presumably the tipping point would be when the act of creating artificial intelligence systems itself becomes something that these systems are better at than human beings. That then allows for something called recursive self-improvement, where to whatever limit is possible, these systems improve themselves. So we will see. We don't quite know where we are, but the point is, can we swim? All right. So at the end of the day, can these systems do what we want and do what we want to do instead of them? The question is of whether a computer can think is no more interesting than the question of whether a submarine can swim. A lot of people are very concerned about, are these like us? Do they have self-awareness and moral worth and internal qualia through which they experience the environment? We don't know, and the systems we have at the moment probably not. But their impact is not limited by that. An intelligent process isn't the same as a conscious process, and an intelligent process can still be very disruptive. So it's worth being mindful that it doesn't matter that they're like us, it just matters that they can do some of the things we do at levels comparable to us. So that scares us, and one of the ways in which humans deal with fear is through humor, and definitely this impacted the software development community, just sort of post-COVID, when the first large-scale transformer-based large language models became widely known. They'd obviously been simmering in the background for a couple of years, but they sort of hit public awareness and most developers' awareness with the introduction of OpenAI's ChatGPT, and people got scared. But this has happened before, and we obviously turn to humor as a coping mechanism. So here are a couple of comic strips. Oh, sorry, as a coping mechanism, there's a meme about copium, this mythical drug that you take that helps you cope with stuff. But this is how we will deal with uncertainty. But here's a couple of comics. I'll read them to you because they're quite wordy, and you're probably not going to find them terribly entertaining because they're literally aimed at programmers. The ones at the left is about someone wishing, this is pre the generative AI revolution, about someday how we won't need programmers, because if we just specify the program, the system can write itself. To which the programmer replies, well, if you can specify the system fully to the point where you can make a program, that's literally a computer program. That is code. Whereas the comic at the top right is about how developers have a sense that they will be able to change everything simply because they are able to create algorithms. But some problems are just genuinely hard within problem domains that we don't necessarily know enough about. So just thinking we can walk in with the computer and suddenly make things better by simply writing a program is a bit naive. And the one at the bottom is about a measure of how complicated a system is based on how much information you need to describe it fully. And then to which the other respondent asks about what's the complexity of his life. To which the joke is that you don't really want to know because it might not be as high as you think it is. One of these comic strips was written by an AI and illustrated by an AI, and I won't tell you which one. But the point is, okay, maybe it wasn't terribly funny to you. I thought they were all pretty good, but then I have a programmer's sense of humor. The question is, does the system really understand humor? And well, you can test it by giving it an unseen comic, and this is one written by a genuine human being. Randall Munro, the person who wrote one of the comics in the previous slide. And it's more of an astronomy joke than or an astrophysics joke than a computer science joke, but often STEM majors tend to like adjacent fields as well. But basically, someone's asked how long their date has been interested in cosmology, and they reply with a figure that basically describes how much light has redshifted due to the expansion of the universe since then. And that figure is roughly 5 years if you translate it, but it's quite an esoteric joke, but the AI system was able to understand and explain the joke quite well. So that says at some point that there's some level of understanding in the system as a whole. Whether that understanding comes from the neural networks that power it, or whether it's embedded in the data sets that trained it is a good question, but the system that results has some understanding of humor. So this isn't terribly new. We've been wanting to have programs that write programs ever since we started programming. One of the key aspects of computer programmers, I think, is that we're quite lazy. So originally computers were programmed by literally flipping logical switches on and off to represent binary numbers that represented instructions data. That was too much effort, so we made computer programs that would do that for us. That was too much effort, so we made assembly languages that at least looked kind of readable. That was too much effort, so we made high-level programming languages. And now we're trying to have programs that write our programs for us. So if we do invent ourselves out of work, it's our own fault. But we've been exploring this for a long time, and one of the earliest programming languages speaks to it. But here's me asking ChatGPT to provide me an example of code that modifies itself. It gets it wrong. For what it's worth, it actually generated a program that modifies one of its own values, which wasn't what I was asking. I was asking for it to write a program that modified its own code, and it gave me a program that modified its own data, which is a significant difference. So that's fine. But we've had programming languages that generate or that are capable of modifying themselves for a very long time. Lisp, the Lisp processing language, is the second oldest of the surviving languages from the dawn of programming, only after Fortran and just before COBOL. Fortran being more scientifically oriented, COBOL being more business oriented, Lisp being, in a sense, more academically oriented. It's found a use in artificial intelligence research because it has this property called homoiconicity, which means that its own data represents itself. So it's very easy to write a program that modifies itself because its own data structure, the list, is what a Lisp program is. And we created hardware to run them efficiently back in the day called the Lisp machine, which kind of echoes the custom AI processing chips that are being built again today. The man in the middle is John McCarthy, who invented the programming language. So fine, let me try again. I actually realized, whoops, I made a mistake here. I phrased the question weird. So they call this prompting, and people think maybe the next job for computer programmers is something called a prompt engineer, where your job is to figure out what the right things to whisper to the AI is to get it to spit out the code that you want. I told it to write self-modifying closure code. That was a typo. I actually meant closure with a J, which is a kind of Lisp. So I correct myself and say, no, whoops, I mean closure with a J, and it spits out closure code, that still does what the original program does, because it's now gotten the wrong idea in its head, which basically means that somewhere in that semantic space of defined by the data set it was trained on through the neural networks, it's moved into a position where now it's near this idea of modifying variables rather than modifying data. So then I tell it, no, what I actually meant was metaprogramming. And then it finally gets it right and spits out a program that actually modifies its own programming rather than just its own values. So this sort of shows that you have to know what's going on to get any use out of these systems, because it often takes a series of prompts to get what you're looking for. And one of the hardest things in software engineering isn't actually writing the code, it's figuring out what the problem is and what the user wants and getting them to think it through themselves. So there's still that very important role. And again, I say this isn't new because we have been writing programs that write programs for a while. An example of this is something called genetic programming, in which we represent programs as little trees or expression trees that then can breed with each other and multiply like living things, crossing over their subtrees in the same way that living things cross over their DNA. And we've created very interesting solutions to problems using it. It's also kind of new. Sorry, I skipped ahead. It also isn't new in an educational context. Obviously, as a computer science educator, if computers can suddenly do the programming I'm trying to teach my students, I'm worried on many levels. I'm worried that they're going to rely on these things to do the work for them, and now policing plagiarism is going to be much harder. I'm also worried that they might not see a need for junior programmers because the system can do that level of programming as well or better than them, which is a danger in all disciplines, because if we let AI cut off the progression of new practitioners to the higher levels where the AI can't perform, we'll have a massive skill shortage as people age out of the system. So in any case, that's my concern. But this has already happened. It happened with mathematics maybe 10 years before it's happening now with programming, with systems for symbolic computation such as Wolfram Alpha, which can do your mathematics homework for you quite well. And that didn't kill mathematics as a profession or as a need within education, because unsurprisingly, you don't actually pay mathematicians to sit down and integrate values or do differentiation or to do things like that. You pay mathematicians to solve problems. And in order to solve problems, they needed to have built up the understanding of how mathematics works and how branches of mathematics relate to each other and how to frame problems within the language of mathematics. And that's what you're actually training mathematicians to do, not to sit and mechanically do integrations. In the same way, we actually aren't interested in paying programmers to write code. We're interested in paying people to provide solutions to problems. So we've gone through this before with mathematics, and I believe that in computer science we'll echo that same progression. It's kind of new though. So some cool things that have happened recently was where we, some researchers have created small little instances of these AIs and given them very specific jobs within the software production pipeline. Jobs like the chief technology officer to select which programming languages to use, programmer AIs to actually implement the code, designer AIs to perform user interface design, reviewers to check the other programmers, testers to check as well, and finally agents that will write the documentation for the system. And it was able to spit out some rudimentary code, a working system, not particularly innovative or great, in the same way that ChatGPT produced novels are not good, and ChatGPT artists or DALL-E art or other systems like that's art is very easy to identify, but still something which is definitely worth paying attention to. It's also kind of interesting in a meta sense that they implemented this within a game environment that they created for a previous paper. So they created a game that creates a game in a sort of recursive system, which I thought was pretty cute. So we will see how things like this develop as we move forward. However, there are some big issues with these generative systems that produce code, as with the ones that produce art and writing. You need to train them on something. They don't inherently understand anything. They simply reflect the patterns that are in the training data, which we call a corpus. So software has licenses, as I'm sure you're aware. People maintain the legal right to their software or give it to their company or give it to the public. And one movement within programming is known as the free software movement, and they've created a variety of licenses. Probably the most famous one is the GPL license, which is interesting because it's kind of a viral license. If you include any code that is licensed with this license in your project, your entire project must also be licensed with this project. So it sort of spreads throughout software ecosystems as more developers use it. And software is often stored in these central repositories, the most famous of these being GitHub. And these AI systems have been trained on these software repositories without any particular regard to the licenses of the software that made them up, which means, technically speaking, that all of those software that is produced by people using, for example, ChatGPT, was created, derived based on free software, which means that an argument exists that the resulting code should also be free, which means that the companies that paid these developers to include this stuff in their system might need to give their software away for free as well, which could cause an interesting cascading effect. And I can tell you that even if there is a legal precedent set that says that GPL3 software is not able to propagate through an AI being trained on it, I can very much assure you that the fourth version of the GPL software will have this provision that any software that is trained or created through an AI system that's trained on it must also then be GPL licensed. So this is going to be an interesting development to watch unfold. And then lastly, just my views on what the role of computer programmers are in the future, having seen an example of a system made up of small AIs that do the jobs of individual programmers. Within IT, we often see two branches. We see the sort of project management, software engineering, software architecture side of things, and the coding side of things, where the actual solutions are written in programming languages. Maybe you could also add a third pillar there of computer science, which focuses more on the mathematics behind it. But I see a future in which the role of software engineer and the role of programmer and computer scientist almost merge together, where the goal of a computer scientist trying to investigate something is to guide a community of small AIs to explore the problem, or likewise to develop commercial software. The software engineer will guide a community of programming AIs to do it, but then must also understand the discipline well enough to fact check what they produce, because these systems are prone to make things up when they don't know the answer. It's called hallucination. It's too late now, but I really do think it should be called confabulation, but it's hallucination, that's what stuck. So I asked the DALL-E AI through ChatGPT to create an image of software engineers merging with programmers, and it produced the following. It took a lot of prompting to get it to not produce a bunch of white people being the software engineers, but I eventually got it right, which reflects the other problem within these large generative systems, which is bias. Because if you train it on data that has inherent biases, it's going to produce output that has inherent biases. And you don't want to basically automate the biases of the past by training these systems on data that contains these misrepresentations. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Duncan. I don't know whether I speak for myself only when I say we were going through phases of confusion slash fear slash worry and all of these very mixed emotions. But thank you very much for those insights. And I just want to speak about, how the first two panelists, and obviously yourself, Prof. Duncan, what you covered, how it's very interesting that the first two panelists spoke about the fundamentals, right? And what you spoke about, and when you look at, the conversations, there is clearly a gap, where there is what we need to focus on at the fundamental level, but there's also all of this stuff going on out there, which we cannot lag behind on. We can't afford to lag behind on that. So I think it's very critical that we find a way to somehow, wing the bridging of that disconnect, because in as much as we need to work on the grassroots, we need to eradicate illiteracy in the country, we need to eradicate illiteracy in the global south, and basically, you know, ensure that development continues. But there's also all of this stuff going on out there, and we need to keep up. We need to catch up. So I think that for me was very interesting to listen to. And thank you all to our panelists. We have some questions from the audience. I'll start with this question here from Anonymous. So this question is specifically directed to Mr. Mciteka. What advice do you have for students that would like to enter the field of community development? Is it a good career to enter?
Well, I'd say it is. It has a lot of opportunities too. But the downside is when you're in varsity, you do not know, you know. In fact, I think the morale pertaining to the degree is quite low, you know. People are not really motivated, so they do not do enough research, you know. There's so much you can do, you know, and I think students that are actually doing community development right now, or development studies or social sciences, should actually spend time researching and trying to see people that are in those fields, because there's so much that you can do. If you want, you can work in the private sector. If you want, you can work in the public sector. So it's not only limited to the public sector. And if you do not want, you don't have to work at the grassroots or at community level, right? You can work in offices, whatever that you like. It depends on what you do. And also, I think it's a skills-based profession. So whenever you're interviewing for jobs, they always target people that have specific skills. So let's say that you want to work for a CSI project at Standard Bank, right? You would have to have a skill in monitoring and evaluation, a skill in project management. And these are skills that you can acquire while here at school, you know, through the societies. When I was at VETS, because when I left UJ, I went to VETS University, I started being a fundraising officer for UNICEF VETS, and that allowed me bountiful opportunities to work as a fundraising officer, you know. So I think it's important to have your degree, but also if you want to pigeonhole or rather specify what you want to do, focus on those skills. And that's what you will highlight in your CV. Your CV should speak to what you want to do, not a general CV. So there's a bountiful of opportunities, and I have a feeling that in the next 5 years, it's going to be one of the leading careers coupled with social work. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for that response. I hope the person who asked, Anonymous, is covered. So the next question is from Thabang Ramatsekisa. Greetings, my name is Thabang Ramatsekisa. In enhancing the healthy mental and physical well-being of our students, we should ensure that their workforce needs are met. Taking into consideration the skills development and entrepreneurship development needed by our students to grow and pursue their dreams, it is very important to help the students to apply their knowledge into practicality in the real world by means of availing the needed resources, such as equipment and capital needed to execute plans and strategies. Doing so will assist in maximizing the number of students, entrepreneurs, or employment creators within the UJ community. Let me give a practical example. Imagine you're a graduate sitting with your qualifications, no employment, no skills development, no entrepreneurship development, and no way forward. End up living the life that you used to live 4 years ago. That's leading to a lot of stress and depression. And when we combine a lot of stress and depression, leads to mentally unhealthy and physically unwell beings. Thank you. All right, I think this is more a comment than anything else. I don't know if there are any more questions we have here. Okay, we have another one from Anonymous as well, another Anonymous. How do we ensure that future generations are equipped with the knowledge, skills, and values needed to thrive in a rapidly changing world? And when I hear, rapidly changing world, I kind of go, into the technological aspect of it, because that's what's really changing very quickly. So I'll direct this question to you, Prof. Duncan.
Sure, thank you. That's a very good question. So some things change and some things stay the same. So fundamentally, skills such as critical thinking, whether they manifest in something like mathematical studies or computer science or even philosophy, are incredibly valuable and will remain incredibly valuable. So there are some skills that that will always be important, whatever they're named. So I think that education should try and identify these invariant skills and focus on developing them, and then also make students robust so that they're able to basically update whatever they've got as needed, but building on top of those fundamental skills that don't change as often. In terms of values, though, that's a very good point, because that's something that we've often neglected, particularly within computer science. It's not been a big focus until the most recent decades. And it's become incredibly important with developments in AI, because we would like to create systems that behave ethically. And if we can't define ethics in a way that's implementable, we're in a lot of trouble, because we're quite prone to just turn these systems loose and see what happens. And if we can't make sure that they're behaving in ways that people generally agree are good, then we have an issue. And likewise, there's a very important problem known as the alignment problem, where basically we must make sure that intelligence systems goals remain aligned to the humans who created them, and that they don't diverge over time. And that's very difficult because it requires a lot of ethical and philosophical reasoning that maybe computer science as a discipline hasn't cultivated enough. So in addition to identifying the invariant skills that I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of cross-disciplinary interaction is important, because we kind of need the philosophers and the educators to stop us causing a lot of harm. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Prof. Duncan, for your response to that question. The next question is related. It's also from an anonymous, and I'm going to direct this question to Mr. Botsime. The question goes, how does the university assist students in being prepared for the rapidly changing world? So that's specifically now speaking to when I presume that the question is specifically focusing then on what you get out of the university system, which would primarily be education, right? So how do we, and I know it's been argued before that, education in itself needs a complete overhaul, because the way that we are currently learning does not address the needs of even the current, present, and the imminent future. So what's your take on that question?
Thank you very much for that question. And, I just want to refer to what Prof said about the skill, that we need to teach. That's what we call in education 21st century skills. In addition to teaching theory, we need to teach the students, 21st century skills, like, they must know how to think critically, they must know how to think creatively, innovation, so I think that's what required. In addition to, in response to what the other person said about, you are at university, actually after you finish university, you have your degree, and then what happens? You go back. But what do you do with that knowledge? Why don't you use it in a creative way, to make your life better? So I think it's very important that, which is also, part of my call, when I call for a revolution in the education system, that, we need to prepare our students, we need to equip them with pertinent skills, which is what is called the 21st century skills. It's a quite a lot of them, communication, creativity, critical thinking, and innovation, and as well as, what we do in the primary and the high school. The approach we are taking now is as what you call SEL, the social emotional learning, which addresses the social and emotional needs of the children. I think that's what needs to happen also at the university level.
Okay, thank you very much for your response to that question. We have one last question here. I feel like schools, it's a comment and question rather. I feel like schools, especially in rural areas, are not providing a well-rounded education that goes beyond academics, that include critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills that will help them to adjust to the ever-changing technology. To ensure that schools create a well-rounded education that goes beyond academics, that includes critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills that will help students achieve more than they can achieve now in the future. What should be done, particularly in schools that are in rural areas like the Eastern Cape and other provinces? And I believe I can direct this question perhaps to Mr. I'm conflicted, actually. I'm conflicted because of the way the question is asked. But I think maybe perhaps I can give it to each panelist, starting from the first all the way to Prof. Duncan, our third panelist, just to give your thoughts on this. And obviously the theme in this question is revolving around, what we spoke about earlier, that even in the education system, it is argued that it's not addressing the needs of the future, and which is very important. And especially our panelist number two, remember you spoke about working at the grassroots, and I believe that mainly affects those who live, of course, in rural areas, just places with limited access to a lot of the amenities that one would need to actively participate in, of the things of future and progress. So what is your take on this question? What can be done to ensure that the future is well catered for in terms of critical thinking, creativity, problem-solving skills through education, especially when it comes to those in rural schools?
So you're going to take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you very much for that question. And like I said, I mentioned in my talk that we establish what we call international teacher training. That's actually our mandate. As teachers coming together to share best practices, to attain quality education. So what we do when we have the conclave as teachers, we share pedagogical approaches with other teachers. We were trying to move from that traditional teaching where the teacher will just impart the knowledge and then the children will regurgitate the information. So we're trying to show teachers that in the 21st century, teaching and learning, there are other approaches such as your PBL, your project-based learning, where the children actually becomes part of the learning, like it's real life situation. And that's where you develop those 21st century skills I spoke about. They're able to communicate, they're able to think critically, they're able to think, creatively, they're innovative. So yes, so we are trying to do that. I think it is through collaboration, like I said, if we can get together, and not just educators, because going back to the policy that I mentioned, the White Paper 6, it speaks about involvement of stakeholders. You need to engage stakeholders such as my fellow panelist, who's a community developer. So what role do they play? I'm very much into theories. I love theories. You read Prof. Briner, he speaks about the bioecological system. He says that a child exists within, systems, and each system, it plays a fundamental role in their growth and development. So it's very important that all these stakeholders, they get involved.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Botsime.
Thank you.
Mr. Zano. Oh, no.
Okay, to answer that question, I'm actually gonna borrow Prof's words. He said something really that stuck with me. The importance of fundamental skills. What I think about the skills of the future is that they cannot exist on their own. They need you to have a basic understanding, or rather a strong grasp of fundamental skills, right? So if you're to catch on the skills of the future or catch up with the future, you need to have been able to, or capacitated well enough to be able to handle the critical skills of the future. So what I'm basically saying is that I think there should be an accentuation, or rather a focus on making sure that there is quality education to ensure that when critical skills or skills of the future come, it's easy for you to grasp on them, or it's easier for you to be able to be sound in them. You're capacitated enough. So I think my focus would be on the fundamental skills to make sure that your reading, your analytical skills, your critical thinking skills are the base, the core of the skills of the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. Duncan.
Okay, thanks. So I suppose I'll take a slightly different angle, and I'll speak to the part of the question that particularly referenced rural schools. So while I don't think that what I'm about to suggest in any means is a complete solution, it certainly, I would believe, be part of the solution. And there's two barriers that I can think of that rural learners may face. One is an infrastructure barrier. So one of the great forces for the democratization of knowledge has been the internet and the World Wide Web and the various other technologies that came with it. But access to power and to high-speed data communication networks in rural areas is certainly a barrier that prevents them from accessing, the high-quality, free learning materials that are available around the world. And the other aspect may also be a language barrier, because a lot of the world's content is in the world's major languages. So, English, French, Spanish, Chinese, the various Chinese languages. But there have been amazing developments in automated machine translation in the past few years. So getting these systems trained well on our South African languages, particularly those spoken in rural areas, so that they can, again, with access to the data communications networks, then also have access to the content, will help. By itself, it's not the entire solution, but it's certainly part of the solution.
Thank you very much. I think we have gained a wealth of knowledge from our panelists this evening, and I just want to thank each of you for the experiences that you have shared and the wisdom that you have shared. And I think what is critical at this point for all of us is to do the best that we can, especially for the younger cohort of soon to become employees or entrepreneurs, or whatever space you will venture into after pursuing your education and entering the field. It's very important at this stage to come up with problem-solving innovations, and innovations which are specific to our country, continent, and of course the region, which is the global South. And for as long as we continue in that direction, I believe slowly but surely, it won't be overnight, but we can eventually bridge the gap somehow. And it's not only about bridging the gap, I believe, it's about, in the process, coming up with even our own innovations, which will work for us and which we can also then present to the world. Because I believe at the end of the day, it's important that we participate actively on the global scale. And that takes not always playing an act of catch up, but also being innovative in in our own right and in our own ways. So with that, I would like to reiterate my gratitude to the panel for all your contributions. I will hand over right now to Mr. Victor Khangale to give the vote of thanks. And this is the last time you will hear from me. So thank you very much this evening to our audience that have supported this event. And we hope that you have learned something and you will implement whatever it is you have learned and whatever you can expand as well from what you have learned going forward. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Victor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Musa. That was very, very good. Presentation on point and 100% from me. Just to say from my side, it was very interesting to get all the information from our panelists. I do want to venture to say that I did feel like I was in the lecture rooms right here at B-Ring. But this time I actually did focus. So thank you very much for the insightful talk, and the intellect that is flowing through this room was fantastic. For you guys at home, thank you very much for joining us. But the conversation never ends. We are a university of conversations. We are a university that like to keep in contact and connected with our alumni. So we created a platform called Alumni Connect. You guys can log in there, register, and continue this conversation and more with not only yourself, but with your fellow alumni who are not only just located here in Johannesburg, but globally as well. All that information you can find on our UJ website. That's uj.ac.za/alumni, uj.ac.za/alumni. You get all that information in terms of it's a fun, just like what Mr. Mpunzi said, something that helps us to develop those for the future. Same with what the actual talking point of today is, cultivating tomorrow so we can develop for the future. And anything else you guys want to be in touch, connect with us, you can find us on all social media platforms. That is on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You find us under UJ Alumni. You get a lot of information in terms of what we're doing next. Our next event, our award-winning alumni magazine is about to be published very, very soon. So keep follow us on those platforms and keep an eye out for that. To our panelists, first of all, Mr. Mpunzi, leadership and the Exco of Convocation. We love to see a lot happening on Convocation, and we're going to be keeping an eye on you guys as Exco of Convocation in terms of what this year will hold for us. And we're very excited as usual. Groundbreaking things might just happen from you guys. Our facilitator, Dr. Musawenkosi Saurombe, excellent facilitation. Knowledge is also a part of it. We hope to keep you around. We love our alumni, so we're going to keep you out in our back pocket so we can have you in a lot more of these talks. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Sizi Botsime, thank you for joining us and adding a perspective about education and championing a Pan-African view to teaching and learning. I mean, it's very interesting to see that in our diaspora, there's still a lot more that needs to happen, even though there is a lot happening, but there's still a lot more steps that we can go. Thank you very much for that insightful angle. Mr. Zanoxolo Mciteka, thank you very much for joining us and showing us the social development aspect. We can see how social development means to you. The energy, the vibe that you brought to this panel discussion was very palpable, and we can see you have now inspired a lot of alumni out there to be able to say social development isn't just about within your own environment, but it's also about our diaspora, and we need to push that engagement as well. Prof. Duncan Coulter, thank you very much. I mean, I have very little information on or knowledge when it came to AI. Coding, but you've helped me to understand that even with the little steps you take, you can still learn a lot more. Thank you very much for the information. Today, I will be working a lot more with AI. I'm pretty sure the alumni office is going to have a nice new employee very soon. And to the alumni office in the background, I'd like to say thank you very much for finding our esteemed panelists. Creating a fantastic event such as this one. And as the alumni office, we are very grateful that you can bring these to the alumni of the University of Johannesburg. And let us keep pushing and getting more of these kind of events to the alumni. And of course, lastly, to you, the person, the audience, the alumni, the friend of the university. This will never be able to happen without your support. And we hope that you can be able to support us and continue to supporting us in the future. As we said in the name of the event, let us all cultivate our tomorrow, so we can navigate the future together. Thank you and have a good evening.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.